Merry Christmas, everybody, and yes, it's actually Christmas time. Christmas Eve is upon us, and I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about one of my favorite Christmas specials ever. Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas. And yes, I am talking about the 1966 animated short by Chuck Jones, and not the animated Benedict Cumberbatch version or the live-action Jim Carrey version, because while both of those are interesting cases of how to botch a beloved Dr. Seuss property in surprisingly different ways, the 66 short really is the only version of the Grinch that we've gotten that gets it so right, and not just matching the spirit and tone of the book, but also presenting it in a way that entertains both children and adults in this half-an-hour window. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that Theodore Geisel, Dr. Seuss himself, was directly involved with this production of How the Grinch Stole Christmas. He didn't just cash a check for the rights to use his beloved characters. He worked on the script, he offered some designs, he even helped to write some of the lyrics to the song You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch, which was made specifically for this short. And I think that level of involvement really helps the final project in feeling as faithful and authentically Seuss as any short or movie that we've gotten since. But Dr. Seuss's involvement is only one half of this coin. The other half of the credit really has to go to Chuck Jones, the animator. And if you don't know who Chuck Jones is, he's a legendary animator. He worked on Looney Tunes for a long time, and he was responsible for some of the most highly acclaimed Looney Tunes shorts out there. And given the opportunity to work on How the Grinch Stole Christmas, he knocked it out of the park. The design that he came up with for the Grinch is arguably the best thing in this special, because while it still does resemble the Grinch from the book, you know, it's this kind of overweight, furry guy with this weird tuft of hair on the top of his head. Dr. Seuss has gone on record saying that the Chuck Jones Grinch looks more like Chuck Jones than he does of the Grinch that Seuss designed. And yeah, I can see a bit of a resemblance there. But it's not just using the interesting face of Chuck Jones that makes this Grinch design work so well. It's the range of emotions and expressions that you can get away with this Grinch without it feeling like a completely different character for each different emotion. It all feels weirdly unified in this malleable face that he's crafted for the Grinch. And they really do give the Grinch some extreme expressions in the special, and it's always interesting to see with each new expression how his teeth change, because as consistent as this Grinch model is, the teeth change drastically in their placement, in their number, and in how much they show from scene to scene, which does help make the Grinch feel a little creepier, more unnatural, almost like this universal monster kind of creature from Black Lagoon mixed with Frankenstein. And speaking of Frankenstein, Boris Karloff, the monster himself, voices the Grinch, and he also narrates the whole special. And he does a really good job too. It's amazing how much his voice as both the narrator and the Grinch himself elevates this special into something that feels more epic than it actually is. And it's because when he's narrating, he uses his more natural, eloquent, relaxing, soothing British voice that you could see sitting around a campfire reading a story to a bunch of kids, and it still has this kind of simple storybook feel. But then when he's voicing the Grinch, he has this more angry, bitter, sinister undertone in his voice that not only helps to delineate the Grinch's voice from the narrator voice, but helps to give some gravitas and weight to this amazingly animated design. And it's when Karloff's voice and Chuck Jones' design come together to create this Grinch that has become an icon of Christmas for decades now, to the point where the voice that Jim Carrey gives to his Grinch is kind of influenced by Karloff's voice from this special. And as for Benedict Cumberbatch, I really have no idea what he was going for. But even with all these other versions, when people think of the Grinch, the first image that comes into their mind and the first voice that comes into their mind is this one. But as perfectly as the Grinch is portrayed in this version, that isn't to shortchange the amazing story that he inhabits. This version is almost a word-for-word adaptation of Dr. Seuss's book, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, and the things that are different don't necessarily change or rewrite what was in the book, but more that they add things onto it to pad it out to reach that 20-something minute runtime. And how they achieve that is a feat unto itself, because they add padding to it that doesn't feel like padding. For instance, when the Grinch is complaining about the noise, he doesn't just say that he's irritated by all the noise, he goes through all the different creative and out there presents that the Who's open, and of course they all make noise and they're all loud and obnoxious, and the devices themselves just keep getting bigger with each passing example, just escalating how loud everything's going to be on Christmas. And even though that this segment does go on for a bit longer than you might expect, it does help you sympathize with the Grinch a bit more, because the longer it goes on, the more irritated you are with, okay, how many different made-up words can Seuss come up with to illustrate a noisemaker? And so you do end up siding with the Grinch, because you're like, yeah, these Who's are annoying. It just goes on and on and on and on. So even though it is still fillery, it does serve a narrative function. And the same thing can be said with everything involving Max. Max the dog gets a lot more screen time in this version than he did in the book, and he really has way more personality here than he has in any of the full-length movies that we've gotten. That's because Max is so immediately identifiable as this earnest, happy, ready to do anything kind of dog. But then when he finds himself being more or less abused by the Grinch, you know, when he gets the big horn tied to his head and now he has to drag the Grinch down the mountain and then back up again, you see the fear and the suffering and the reluctancy to actually go through with all the Grinch's plans, and that creates some very hilarious moments of conflict between Max and the Grinch. And what's really good is the Grinch is actually allowed to be a bit mean to Max, in that same kind of Wile E. Coyote, Looney Tunes, Roadrunner kind of way, where, yeah, the Looney Tunes are kind of mean to each other, but that's the fun, is that they take the hits, but they also give the hits, and it's this back and forth. That's kind of what it is with Max. And Max actually gets a few good licks in too. It's not just the Grinch beating up on Max all the time. Max has his moments where he has the upper hand and the Grinch's expressions are appropriately hilarious. But now let's talk about the part in this special that everybody knows. Even if you've never seen this special, you still know this part, and it's the song You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch. And it was sung by Thurl Ravenscroft. And not only did he sing the song, he was one of the original voices for Grim Grinning Ghosts in the Haunted Mansion, and he did the voice for Tony the Tiger for a lot of his life, and he does pop up in a few Disney things here and there, and he graciously supplied the vocals for this song, and he made it an instant Christmas classic. Now, I always associated this song with when the Grinch is down in Whoville and he's systematically taking all the presents and wreaths and decorations and everything, but that's not really where we first hear this song. The first part of this song is sung not when the Grinch is down in Whoville, but when he's up on Mount Crumpet getting ready, when he's sewing his costume and making his hat and doing all the preparations for Christmas. And I thought that was a nice use of this song, because that really is the first time when you see the Grinch go full bad guy. When he commits, he's like, yes, I'm inspired, I'm gonna go down and steal Christmas. And then you see him preparing with his little sewing machine, and the song kicks on, and you're like, okay, he is a bad guy, and the song is giving me all these really out there and creative ways to tell me that he's the bad guy. And that's a lot of fun too. And again, you can see Seuss's influence in some of these descriptors. Like seriously, who comes up with your heart's a dead tomato splashed with moldy purple spots? That could only ever come from the mind of Dr. Seuss. But when the Grinch does go down into Whoville and he's stealing Christmas, or at least what he associates with Christmas, the song kicks on again and goes for a long while, and you see him take everything. And in the book, you don't see a lot of him actually stealing Christmas, and there's only a few pictures of him going to different locations. But this short takes full advantage of that premise. When the book says that he slithered and slunk, you actually see the Grinch slithering on the ground like a snake. You see him in the tree taking presents. You see him using a magnet for the nails in the stockings and then catching them one by one. There is some really creative imagery used during this segment, and it's so good that they actually loop the footage a couple times, because, I don't know, this short didn't have the biggest budget, so if they could reuse animation, they would, and they reuse some of it, but it doesn't feel like, oh, they just ran out of money and they're reusing old footage, because you're just like, oh yeah, that's a different house that had kind of the same thing, so it still works as a narrative. But anyway, after he's gone to every house and taken every present, him and Max descend Mount Crumpet ready to dump the presents over a cliff. And he's all excited to hear the Who's crying when they wake up because, oh, they're going to be so sad and they're not going to be that noisy, but maybe I can hear the pain that these children are going to feel on Christmas. And yeah, if you haven't noticed that the Grinch is the bad guy, this is the time when you're like, yeah, he is literally taking pleasure in the sadness and despair of children. And that's not somebody you'd want to root for, but he's animated in such an expressive and eccentric way that you kind of can't help but appreciate at least his commitment to the cause. But if you know the story, you know that the Who's aren't crying and they just walk out singing the Fa-Hoo Dore song, and they come to where the tree used to be and the bells are ringing, but instead of a tree, since the Grinch took the tree, there's this ball of light. It's this star that then ascends into the sky. And as a kid, I was really kind of confused by this. What is that? But then I immediately went and associated that with the star that the wise men followed on Christmas in the Bible, and that's the true meaning of Christmas. It's not about the presents, it's not about the commercialism. It's about the birth of Jesus and the selfless act of God sending his son to take all of our sins away. And even if you're not a religious person, it's still about hope and selflessness and charity and love and compassion and all the great intangibles that you feel around the holiday season. And I think having the star there embodying the true meaning of Christmas was a great choice because it doesn't beat you over the head with the religious symbolism of the holiday, but it also doesn't ignore it either. And it keeps it appropriately ambiguous when they say maybe Christmas perhaps means a little bit more, and the Grinch learns the lesson, and you don't really know what it was that triggered the Grinch. Just like in my last video when I talked about how something triggered another green outsider that doesn't understand the holiday in my Justice League video. But it forces the kids and even the adults in the audience to really question what Christmas means to them and where do they put value in this holiday. And after the Grinch sees their goodwill, he races up and tries to save the presents. His heart grows 3 sizes, breaks the Grinchometer, which is just another great animation tool to show that his heart was 2 sizes too small, and then seeing it grow at the end. That's just a nice little touch. But he gets the strength of 10 Grinches plus 2, and he lifts up the sleigh, and he goes and whizzes with his load. Seuss's words, not mine. And he goes and returns everything that he took from the Who's. And the Who's are happy, and they invite him to celebrate a meal with him, and he's carving the roast beef, and everyone's having a good time. But what I love about this special so much, and something that both of the other Grinches botch completely, is the reaction of the Who's upon seeing that everything that they set up for Christmas has been taken away. And I love it because the Who's don't even notice that anything's missing. The way they're animated, it looks like they walk out with their eyes closed, just in prayer almost for how great this day is. And they gather around the nothing that then becomes the star. And they're singing with their full hearts. And I don't even think a lot of them even noticed that anything was different because they never put their heart into the stuff, into the commercialism of Christmas. Yeah, they enjoyed it, and they used this stuff as this big celebration, and they were very fanatical about the holiday, but it was never about the stuff for the Who's. And it saddens me that these other adaptations feel the need to make it where, oh, the Who's need to learn a lesson, and the Grinch is the one that kind of forces them to reevaluate where they put their faith in the holiday. Because that was never the point of Seuss's book, and it's not the point here. The point is that the Grinch is the one that has the bad attitude and needs to learn a lesson, and the Who's, being pure at heart, help teach the Grinch the error of his ways. It's a simple morality tale about what the true spirit of Christmas is, and an old grumpy man accepting that. And that's pretty much all I have to say on How the Grinch Stole Christmas. It's a great special, but there is something that I always did wonder about this version, is why are the Who's so obsessed with making noise? It's almost like if they didn't make so much noise, they would have been eradicated from existence. But I don't think Seuss was ever that interested in building a shared universe, so I'm sure that's just a coincidence. But now I turn it over to you guys. What do you think about How the Grinch Stole Christmas? Do you like it? Do you like any of the other versions better? I know this version is always on at my house come Christmas time. But whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby. This is my nerdy talk, and Merry Christmas.